We asked you to submit your back squat videos for a form review, and as predicted, all of you are making a very similar list of mistakes. So while we didn't get to everyone, of course, there were too many entries, but there's a series of videos here which I bet you are probably making one of these mistakes, or you're making a combination of those. Now, if you'd like to progress your own back squat, hit the link below. There's 2 back squat programs on the Sika Strength app. You've probably heard of them, the Road to Anywhere back squat programs. They are wildly successful. 2 sessions per week, 8 or 12 weeks long. The RDA programs are notorious for putting big numbers on people's back squats, anywhere from 15 up to, and I'm not joking you, 45 kilos, depending on the lifter, depending on how hard you go at it. When you get the Sika Strength app, you can 2 programs per month. You can switch between programs at any time for the price of your subscription. Little discount now at the moment because we have a new landing page and we want to switch everyone over to that. Hit the link below. There's a lot of nice things about Kendrick's back squat. I like the rack position. I like his elbow position at the top. I like how he starts the lift. So as he goes through, when he begins the lift, when he breaks at the hip and the knee, everything in my opinion is perfect. Now, where I see Kendrick running into issues when he gets to heavier weights is the bottom position. So what we'll see at the bottom position here is Kendrick is really far back behind the barbell with his hips, and it looks to be an ankle mobility issue. Now, he's got great hip flexion here. He's very, very deep. He's still got good thoracic extension here. He's in a really good position, and I like the position he's at. However, the knees are just a bit too far back. Now, what'll happen at heavier weights is that his knees are not going to be able to push forward like he's doing here at the moment, and then his hips will get sent back. Now, it's an absolute testament to how strong Kendrick is the fact that even though his knees actually end up a little bit further back, he initiates the squat by pushing his knees forward, which is absolutely correct. That's perfect. That's what you want for a high bar squat, is you want to be pushing your knees forward as you begin the ascent. So what should Kendrick focus on here? First, we need to look at ankle mobility. We need to see, is this an issue that can be fixed? Is this an anatomical issue? Sometimes, rarely, but sometimes, someone can just be in a position where there is no possible way they can get their knees any further forward due to their build. However, if we watch when he begins the ascent, his knees do get pushed further forward. So I think this is a bit of a mobility and learned position. What would I do here? Well, actually, what I'm probably doing here is some combination of pause squats. Not that heavy, just purely to learn that position. Or some touch and go squats where he doesn't fully complete the rep at the top and he just comes almost to lockout, back down again to really learn for keeping those knees forward. I suspect pause squats would be a little bit better here and force those knees forward at the bottom position. Lastly, what you could probably do, Kendrick, is the addition of some heels elevated zombie squats once per week, 3 to 4 sets of 8 reps, and I think this should help. You could even do those pauses as well to see if that would assist. Great squat though, really nice. It's all downhill from here. No, I'm a mess. Matt makes a really common mistake here. This is 165 kilos and a miss at 170 kilos. What's super common with this, and it's a big problem a lot of you are making, is the elbow direction and where his elbows travel. His elbows travel forward, which is the worst thing you can do with your elbows. This is the last thing you want to be doing with your elbows when you're squatting. His elbows pull forward. What this causes to happen is it separates our shoulder blades. This puts more flexion in our upper back. This then allows the barbell to travel forward. Eventually the barbell reaches a tipping point where you're no longer able to resist it with this upper back flexion, and then you tip forward. Your knees shift back, your hips shift back correspondingly. You are no longer using your legs effectively because you're in a position where the barbell is too heavy for you and you cannot squat the weight because you're not in a good position. Technique does matter. Elbow position really matters. What does Matt need to do to fix this? Super simple. Don't do this. It also looks like Matt is false gripping the barbell. Not a fan of false gripping. I know it feels really nice, but in general it usually leads to this position where the elbows come forward. So what I would like Matt to do, first of all, take a full grip on the barbell. Try and aim for more of a straighter wrist, less extension in your wrist position. Squeeze the shoulder blades together. I know it's a cliche cue, but squeeze the shoulder blades together. Keep them rigid in the back squat position and then really focus on maintaining that elbow position. What also might help here is actually just squeezing the barbell with this full grip should help keep those elbows a little bit more rigid. Common problem. Good chance you're making it. Stop doing it, guys. Okay, next we've got... I'm not saying that. Next we've got a 190 kilo squat, I think. Really common problem as well. is the head position. Now this is actually a good squat, very successfully made, but we can see this chin tucked position. A lot of people like this position. It feels really strong, but what this usually does is limits the amount of extension we can get in our upper back. And when we're squatting, we want upper back extension and lower back extension, certainly in the high bar squat. And when we tuck this chin, what's eventually going to happen, just like that elbows forward, is we're going to push through the upper back. The flexion is going to increase and we're going to push through that flexion point. And as a result, it's going to cause us to miss that barbell forward. We're going to tip forward. It's going to be very ugly, or eventually we're going to hit a point where we are going to miss. What's the solution for this one? Look up a little bit higher. Simple fix. Very common. Next, we've got Big Chungus. My God. I know a lot of you sent your real names, but I don't have them here. So here's a really interesting one. Not super common. No, it is common. It is one of the more common ones. It's a little bit novel. So you can see at the bottom of Big Chungus's squat, you'll see that as he seems to hit the bottom, there seems to be this extra movement where his knees really rush forward and his hips go with it. This is caused by a really simple error. And it's the fact that the hips are going too far back on the descent of the squat. So if you imagine hips are kind of traveling in an arc here, and to reach the bottom position in a good position, he can't sit back with the hips as far back as they want to travel. So if his hips follow the line of keep traveling back here, what would happen is that he would obviously miss it forward because he would end up in a really forward inclined position at the bottom. So what happens is you need to immediately bring the hips into the bottom. So you can see that really forward knee travel happening very suddenly in a short frame of time. So the knees get kind of pushed forward. It's like a little smash. And this comes from an inability to get the hips to descend a little bit straighter. And to a certain extent, it's also from the knees not traveling forward enough as you begin the descent of the squat and keeping them pushed forward. So you need to focus on the hips going vertically and the knees traveling forward. Harder one to fix. And it can feel a little bit different. So again, here I'd be looking at some slow descent squats, possibly some pause squats just to learn the position. Again, pause squats aren't great for moving your max numbers unless you spend a load of time doing them. But they are a decent teaching tool that can be done in your warm-ups just to learn this position. Certainly a slow descent. Slow down the tempo would be great here, where you look at keeping the hips going vertically down for you and pushing the knees forward, Mr. Big Chungus. Next, we've got Hugo. Nice little low bar squat here. And a really interesting problem going on with the type of shoe used, but primarily the knee position is contributing to that. So we got a low bar squat. To me, this looks like it's passing competition depth. That hip crease looks to be below the knee. Certainly from this angle, I wouldn't be questioning it. Now, what happens is we're in the bottom position here, right? Decent bottom position. But we're in a position where Hugo is really exposed, where he's not very strong. So we have a wide squat, which is generally probably a better idea for hitting competition depth, which is very fair. But we'll immediately see some knee valgus. Now, I know, knee valgus, everything is fine. Nothing hurts, nothing injures you. You can adapt to everything. I'm being sarcastic to a degree. But the real problem with knee valgus when you hit the bottom of the squat is that when the knees come in, you must imagine the hips at the other end of the knee can only go in one direction unless you have excellent ankle mobility. The hips can only go backwards. And in a low bar squat, that is the last thing we want to do, is send the hips backwards, because this is going to incline the torso further forward already. If we're low bar squatting, we're already at a bit of an inclination with the torso. And as a result, we're going to push this a little bit further forward. So while he does hit a decent position in terms of fighting it through, this is going to get very costly once we get above these weights. So we can see the knee shift back. He does a decent job of trying to keep the hips in. But when we're really above parallel here, we're looking at the hips being very, very far back, much further back than I would like. And if this is a heavier weight, this would definitely punish him at this position. So first thing I would look at changing is these look to be barefoot boots. Are they literally the barefoot ones? They're called barefoot. I would start by changing those. Now, I'm not a huge proponent of the tripod stance or screwing your toes into the ground. However, I'm also not against it. The right cue for the right person at the right time is the right cue. In this case, most people in barefoot shoes are probably going to be better off actually squatting barefoot. What I've seen from barefoot shoes is that the little bit of that softness underfoot doesn't provide for great traction or great friction, and it's going to start some of those problems. And that's the first place I'll be looking at here, is actually just changing the shoes, Not necessarily to a pair of weightlifting shoes, although that could help. I would actually possibly look at squatting barefoot or getting a really low pair of heels for your weightlifting shoes. Then we need to address is the knee valgus. Now, this could be a hip mobility issue. Sometimes it can be an ankle mobility issue, which I don't think. We seem to have pretty good forward knee travel. So the next area we're looking at here is probably something in relation to the hip. Are we missing some hip internal rotation, some hip external rotation? It can be either of those. Knee valgus and strength is an interesting topic. Generally, it's a combination of mobility and strength. It's not usually a positional thing. You can't really teach away knee valgus for a lot of people. It's just not something that disappears where we're like, don't push your knees in, don't let them come in. It doesn't really work like that. We need to solve an issue. So for me, knee valgus is always a technical issue. The injury risk, we'll see. We'll see in about 15 years if it's something meaningful. But currently, it's definitely a technique issue, definitely on low bar for most lifters. So I'd be looking at hip mobility here, probably external rotation, but you'd be surprised how things compensate. And then I would be looking at strengthening the quads a little bit more. Belt squats, fantastic. High bar squats for powerlifters, low bar squatting is number one though. So doing some high bar squats, a whole block of high bar squats would make a huge difference here. Next, we've got Sika. I think it was Christian. Christopher. I think he has got 170 for a set of 5 here. Fantastic squat. He's running the first RTA squat program. Now, really interesting, really subtle change here, okay? And it's very similar to the second squat we saw with the elbows coming forward, but he's in a really loose upper back position. And you'll see some butt wink here again. Now, we're touching on all the hot topics when it comes to back squatting. Butt wink is an interesting topic. Sometimes butt wink is an indicator of a technical issue. I'm not really concerned for butt wink. Certainly we see in weightlifting as kind of this reverse butt wink when we move back into extension on the way up. What's happening here is that he's losing his position on the way down. Now this is coming from the rack position. So these elbows are too vertical, way too much extension in the wrist. The grip is probably a bit too close, which is not a super common problem. What I would be doing here is moving that grip slightly further out, looking for a straighter wrist position, and then slightly, I'm talking half the weight of the barbell, move that barbell further down your back. This will lock in the upper back better. And if the upper back is locked in better for a deep high bar squat, the lower back is going to be in a much better position. So these are very good squats, good mobilities, well built for squatting. But if we could change that upper back position, you can see he fights for the upper back position on the way up. He goes into more extension, which is great. But if we can get more extension at the start of the rep, this will keep the rest of the reps much better. Because eventually when you get to a heavy single, again, we're always thinking what will probably happen at heavier weights. He is going to fight a position where he can no longer get into extension fast enough and we're going to miss the weights. Another common problem, he's beginning to squat too fast is the main problem here. And then we're not able to control that speed consistently. So this is fast start, slowing down as you get through parallel, and then a really fast drop. It's a really bad tempo to squat because eventually, again, as weights get heavier, what's going to happen is you're not going to be able to control your positions. You're not going to be able to control your speed consistently enough. And then as a result, we're going to really mess up our timing. A second thing that seems to be happening here is he's pushing his knees out as he begins to squat. I would say if I could give a real carte blanche recommendation for everyone, don't ever push your knees out when you're squatting. We don't need knees out. We need forward. Knees that are going out are going forward somewhat, but in general, knees that are going out aren't traveling forward enough. So when we're high bar squatting, knees out is rarely a good cue. So pushing the knees forward here, and then we're looking for a smoother tempo. So beginning the rep, I want you to go smoother and then keep the tempo of the descent the same for the whole repetition. So nice and smooth on the descent, smooth all the way down, and then smooth into the bottom position. A second thing here is stop pushing the knees out, and I would suspect that what make this a little bit better is we're slightly too wide with that squatting position. So what would I do here? Bring in the toes slightly, bring the feet a little bit closer, and then very minorly turn the toes out. This will give a better bottom position because you look too exposed down here at the bottom. Here we've got Brady Osborne, and he's squatting 120 kilos for 3 sets of 3. Now Brady is someone who has got a lot of mobility available to him, and what's happening here at the top of the rep, we've got this decent start position, but what we're not really focusing on is the lower back position. It looks to me like the belt is too tight. And this is actually a pretty common position, where if we have the belt too tight, we'll see this inability to maintain enough extension for the lower back in a high bar squat. And so when we're wearing a belt that's too tight, what's going to happen is we're going to be forced into more flexion than we want to. Now, I do want to touch, because it's possible someone will bring it up and we want to give a caveat. There is a bit of research looking at loaded extension and flexion when you go through a squat. And some of this research compares it through your unweighted lumbar extension versus your weighted lumbar extension. And then they compare this at different points and they say it goes through a lot of extension. But there's some research pushing back against this. There was Australian researchers who actually compared loaded extension versus the squat rather than unloaded versus the squat. And they actually saw that there was much less change in extension to flexion in the full rep of the squat. Either way, I don't need research to tell me, from a lot of experience of squatting, in the high bar squat, we want lower back extension and we want to maintain as much as we can in the squat. Unless you're hypermobile, you're not going to be in a position where we're going to be looking at way too much extension. And what happens here is similar to that tempo, or similar to that squat where we saw the hips swinging like a pendulum. We can see that at the start, plenty of extension, perfect position here, very happy with this. But as we go through, as we're getting still above parallel here, we can see more flexion, and then we end up in more flexion here because the hips aren't able to stay in a good position. We're not able to stay in a tilted pelvis. We're not able to maintain some lower back extension. So when we have this belt that's too tight, we're forced into more flexion, and generally this leads to that upper back compromising slightly and the hips shifting back. So what I'll be looking at here, probably slightly loosening the belt, and then looking at a little bit more of in maintenance of lower back extension as you move through the squat, because it's not a mobility issue. Is it a strength issue? It's all strength issues technically, but in this case, this is a positional issue, and I would look at the belt. We've got Lenny. Lenny is actually, I remember this one, he's a semi-pro French rugby player. He's in the back row, so I didn't want to touch on some of the athletes. Very mobile for a rugby player. Is it sevens, Lenny? You didn't specify. Maybe I'm categorizing you. Maybe you're not sevens. Maybe you're just really fast for 15s. So main thing here, this is also another kind of common issue, and it's someone who is super mobile, who's got lots of range of motion in their upper body, will always tend to pull those elbows up super high. So what we can see here, where Lenny starts, right, is a solid position. I'd actually like to see the barbell slightly lower down here, but as you begin the squat, elbows go higher, you're tilting forward, we're putting a bit more upper back rounding or flexion, because you have the range of motion to it. And then when you go for the ascent, the forearm is nearly parallel with the ground. What this does is push that barbell really far forward. Now you have a good squat. It's 2 reps at 170, so it's pretty strong. So what we're going to be looking at here is not letting the hips go back when you begin the squat, not letting the torso go forward when you begin the squat, keeping those elbows in the same position, and just trying to let the hips go vertically, or at the very least breaking into hips and the knees at the same time, but not letting the hips break first. So when we begin the squat here, if we watch the hips and the knees, we'll see that the hips break before the knees. See disjointed timing there. So if we go back, hips go first, then the knees. We want them both going at the same time for you. So Lenny, a few things to work on there. Barbell position, elbow position, and the timing of the descent with the hips and the knees. All are very important. You need to work on all of them. But it is a 243 kilo back squat, and it is his squat PR. So this one is an interesting one, is we have very good wrist position here, but we also have 2 vertical elbows. Now he makes the squat, which is great, but what often happens when we have very vertical elbows is the hips usually shift back, because if the elbows are too vertical, what this is like is when the elbows are moving forward, we're exposing the upper back, the shoulder blades are separating away from each other. The shoulders are separating away from each other. We're rounding that upper back, because if the elbows are too vertical, while it feels really nice, it feels like a great position, it generally forces those hips to go back slightly, which we can see here, and then eventually he'll get to a weight where this becomes a problem. So again, this is always my thought process when we're looking at max weights, is that, okay, a technique is serviceable now, but will this cause problems if we want to progress more in the future? Most of us want to progress more in the future. And in this case, this is one of the things I would see causing an issue. So I would look for a slightly less vertical elbow position, still keep the same wrist, try and keep the hips in as you begin the ascent. So as you're squatting up, especially for that high bar, keeping the hips in, keeping the elbows rigid, but not as vertical as they are here. Common problem, it feels nice, it's no bueno for those heavier weights. And we can see Part of this as well, at the start of the squat, he shifts the hips back, just like the last person, like Lenny, where I need to see those hips and those knees breaking at the same time. We don't want to see the hips shifting back first and then the knees. That said, very good squat, 243 kilos, massive squat, huge, big time weights. Very, very solid. Now, it was a good PB in general, but this is a form review, so we're going to find something. First of all, we're starting with that upper back mobility. Barbell's probably slightly too high. So if the barbell is slightly too high up your neck, it's going to push it too far over your center of balance. This is going to force you to move forward like this, move into more upper back flexion. Then we're going to see as those elbows are too high, then these forearms get above parallel with the floor. We're in an obtuse angle with the floor. We're no longer parallel. We're way bigger than where we want to be. So we need to lower that barbell down. We need to look for a better rack position with our elbows and maintain that. But also in this case, I'm thinking you just need some good old-fashioned better back strength. You need stronger legs and a stronger back. Strength helps with everything. Good technique and good strength leads to big numbers. But even if you have bad technique, better strength will help. So I'd be probably looking at more strength, but definitely more strength in the quads, but definitely more work on the upper back. We have any number of options here and the core as well. Back extensions, seal rows, any number of core work. Weighted sit-ups are fantastic. Horizontal rows, straight arm lat pull downs, weighted pull-ups, weighted chin-ups, barbell rows, anything. Start making the back stronger, improve that rack position, and we'll have a better squat, Sean. Main thing here is I don't like the grip. This is the false grip. Is never a good idea. And we can see the wrist is resting on the left arm here for Maelstrom. What can happen here is that barbell will drop down, slam into your elbow. Now, it might get caught in something, especially when you're in a cage. This could cause some issue. Definitely, we always want to be safe. We definitely want to be making sure that a minimum safety is hit here, and this wrist position isn't good. Maybe you're injured. If that's the case, get a safety squat bar, do something else, put straps on the barbell and hold on to them like this, but don't do this style of squatting because this is dangerous. And unfortunately, another person died this year. I think it was in India from a back squat. Don't watch the video, but it is, rare, but it is something that can happen, and I'm not going to say it's happening to you, Maelstrom. No bad juju wished on you, but I do want to make you and everyone else aware. Have your hands on the barbell. Make sure you're in a good position. Now, you have squatter bars and stuff set up here, and you're in an environment where you can't dump it on the ground, which is perfect, but make sure you're having a grip on the barbell. And if you can't grip the barbell, just don't squat. It's not worth it for those scenarios where you break an elbow, you rupture your bicep, something terrible happens, you pull your shoulder out of your socket, you spiral fracture your shoulder. Any number of these things are terrible and are not good for performance. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. Check out the link below. I promise you, the programs are so good. If you've watched this and you've ran any of our programs, leave them in the comments and let people know. There's reviews on the website. There's a discount now for March and April because we're trying to bring everyone into this system. Just better payment software. It's better for everyone involved. Click the link below. Again, if you're just looking for squatting, 8 weeks or 12 weeks, 2 sessions per week. One of them doesn't even have assistance exercise on the RTA in the first program. 8 weeks, 2 sessions for bigger PBs. The value for money, the value per euro you get, or per dollar, or Australian dollar, or wherever you are. What do Norwegians have? There's a lot of Northern Europeans in our programs. It's incredibly valuable. When you run the programs, everyone just keeps rerunning them because they're like, oh, these are incredibly effective. So thousands of people have ran them. Click the link. Come on, click it. I'm going to wait here for a second until you click the link. Just have a look at the page for me. Just have a look and be like, okay, watch the video if Fitz talking about the app. I'm waiting for you. Okay, thanks for watching. We'll be doing more of these in the future.